Okay. Okay. I have approximately 2 hours first, and then dinner, and then another maybe hour to cover thousands of years, well, hundreds of years. And so what's my goal? My goal is to introduce you to some of the major art, the major time periods, and the major ideas. And I want us to follow this trajectory and see what's changed. Okay? And why do we want to do this? Because it's important to know where we've come from, always in art and in history. Because again, art's not created in a vacuum. Okay? So, with that in mind, put your seatbelts on, because we're going to go. Do you have room? Okay, good. So let's start out with prehistory. And I know that you're probably going, what? We don't know why people created art, prehistorical people created art, because when we're talking about prehistory, what don't we have?
History.
We don't have history, which means we don't have what?
Information, knowledge.
Information, but what gives us knowledge?
Written writing, yeah.
Written records. We don't have the written records. So how do we know about prehistoric people?
Their art.
Their art, or their artifacts. And, you know, we gotta, why do I want to even start here? I want to start here because creativity is in our DNA. I mean, we've talked about that, right? And so even prehistorical people created art. Now, I'm giving you a date. The date is what art historians will give you. I'm just going to say that up front. Whether we agree with that date or not, it's not the discussion that we're having right now. But here's something that came, one of the earliest artifacts that we have is this woman of Willendorf, or Venus. Speaking of Venus, there she is. Now, we don't know why she was created, but why would you assume?
Because humans are fascinated with sex.
Well, and it's more than just sex, April, but think about that. Have you thought about a female having a baby? What?
Oh. Okay.
Is that one of the most incredible creative processes in the world? I mean, that's, you know, even though it's not a really painless process, it's a pretty amazing thing to say, oh, I have worked with God to create this baby. And so fertility is, throughout history, an important thing in art. We're going to see it. Every civilization has these, what we consider fertility images. Okay, and so they exaggerate fertility parts of the body. And then, of course, we've got this. We might turn that light off. That might help.
You turn the light.
No, I did a cave painting mural in my basement.
Oh, awesome. Cool.
I'll have to show you guys a picture.
Yeah, show us the picture. That would be great. And you know, cave paintings.
Not quite as good as that,
we don't know why cave paintings were created. We don't really know why. There's all kinds of suppositions, but we don't know why. But can I just say to you that that's beautiful?
Yes.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using rudimentary
It's simple,
tools.
but beautiful because the shapes more than colors.
Yeah. And they actually use, if the wall came out and had a hump on it, they could make that the hump of the animal. I mean, they were, you know, working with the stone.
That's cool.
And the other thing to think about is that none of these caves in Spain or in France are easy to get to. They're extremely difficult to get to. So it tells you something, doesn't it? Okay, so we're creating art very, very, very early. Okay, what about early civilizations? Well, of course, they created art. The Sumerians they built the ziggurats. And I'm not going to focus as much on architecture again, because we've got to focus on something. I spent hours and hours and hours trying to sift through what did I want to show you out of thousands of works of art. Trust me, I eliminated some of my favorites. But I tried to also bring you some that I thought you might be fascinated with. These figures were found in a ziggurat temple. Are you familiar with ziggurats? You all know that.
Yeah, they're pyramids, right?
Uh-huh.
But
for whom?
I can't remember the name of their particular deity.
They're like temples in a way.
For the Mesopotamians, right?
Yeah.
Sumerians, and do you remember their stair step? Okay.
Yeah.
But look at these figures, and we know about them because by the time we get to Mesopotamia, in the early, this is one of the earliest civilization, we believe, they're writing, and we have people who can read their writing, right? We actually had a Milligan professor who retired who could read the ancient texts. Yeah, I was impressed. And these people are put in the temple, and what do you think they're doing?
They look like they're praying.
Praying.
They're praying, okay? And they put them in the temple, and they left them there to pray all day long for them. I think that's really convenient.
Yeah. Kind of like a
Don't you?
substitute.
Wow.
I really like that idea. You know, here you just put you here, and you just pray all day long for me. And look at what they've got. They're very very stylized. There's conventions.
Yeah.
They've got what?
Big eyes.
Big eyes, because you know, what do we usually think about when we think about eyes?
The soul.
The soul, the window to the soul. So that might have something to do with them. Are they realistic?
They could be. I bet they probably, if that had been what they were going for, they could have done that back then, but they're really not.
Yeah,
But
I was
their
going to say, I
proportions
hope
are-
they don't look
Yeah.
like that.
It's kind of realistic in the sense that anime is realistic.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, it's very different. Okay, so there's, you know, again, the purpose, we know the purpose of these figures. They're there to pray in the temple. Okay, now let's go to Egypt. Second major ancient civilization. These particular figures are cubic, which is kind of interesting. They actually, I love the way they carve these. You have a cube of stone, and you just carve it out.
Oh.
Oh.
You see, if I showed you a side view, you could see. These figures were in a tomb. Okay. Now you know the pyramids. Yes. There's not art in the pyramids. Temple art came later in the underground tombs. Okay. But you might have in the tombs these kind of figures. These are Ka figures, Ka, and they would house the spirit of the deceased.
Hmm.
And you put them in your tomb.
Oh.
And only the tomb of the wealthy. Okay. You know the pyramids are very select. People get to have a pyramid. You know. And it wasn't until much, much later that normal people said, well, we want to be buried too. We want to have a special place. And this is ironic, and I don't want to get off on this tangent too much because it'll be here forever. But you know how they mummified the kings and the pharaohs, and they threw normal people in the sand and just buried them.
Mhm.
Guess who's preserved better?
You guys in the sand.
The guys in the sand.
Oh, wow.
Just goes to show, you know. Okay, so now let's go to ancient Greece. What do you know about ancient Greece? Huh?
Alexander.
Can you? He's later ancient Greece.
Speed as possible to think.
Yeah. Yes, it sure was. What do we call them? City states. Why would we call them a city state?
There's single cities that they're like the government themselves.
Yeah, each city was a part of the Greek nationality, but they each had their own independent laws.
Yep.
So the Greek could move freely from one to the other if you wanted to, but they had to follow their laws.
They also fought each other a lot. They didn't get along. They didn't get along very well. The Greeks considered themselves superior to everyone else. Everyone else were barbarians.
That's still the case.
It is still the case. It surely is. And we want to land with them for a little bit because the ancient Greek world, as far as the art and thinking, is going to influence the rest of history. Really. And when we use the word classical, we're going to be referring back to ancient Greece. Okay? So why would that be important?
Oh, because the Renaissance was modeled after Greek art, right?
It was.
Greece really pioneered the technical procedures and skills required to make great art.
Exactly. So let's talk about it. What did they believe? Ooh, that just gets right in the way, doesn't it? Let's see if I can move that. Oh.
Minimize.
Oh, yeah. Can I minimize that on my screen? Or do we have to see it?
Yeah, click that.
Perfect. Okay. So what did these early Greeks believe? They believed, and I'm going to use two terms, being and becoming, which I know is going to be a little bit different, but they believed in a higher, perfect, eternal, unchanging reality. And we're going to call that being. So where do you find this higher, perfect, eternal, unchanging reality in the Greek world? The gods. Okay, so they did have a whole pantheon of gods, right?
I don't know though. It kind of changed as time went on because, they had the gods,
Mhm.
and then Aristotle kind of points out the gods are really gods.
They are very clever gods.
They are.
Yeah, and they're not really
Yeah.
working so well
I mean,
for us, are they?
it's like they're worse than men in some regards. I mean, not even not even a man would dare commit adultery with his wife, but Zeus does it all the time.
I think he's talking about Augustine.
Might be no, is it Augustine?
He
I thought-
writes a great deal about
I thought
these
Plato
gods.
and Aristotle pointed that. I think
Aristotle does too.
Yeah, I think Aristotle pointed that out, and he talked about his idea really was the forms.
That's right. And well, Plato's were the forms,
Mhm.
and and Aristotle will go to a point where he says there's a prime mover. There's something out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's a little bit more realistic. Now, what I want to say though is that belief is going to bring us into idealism.
Mhm.
There's some perfect something out there. Okay, so when we're talking about art, idealism is what we're going to see. Okay, the bold, and maybe you can tell, well, you can't really tell it's bolded, are words that we're going to use in art. What else did they believe? Okay, they didn't believe anything. Okay, we locked up here. I think we've got something here. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Dane. It's got a little pencil with it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Something has gone
But you
wrong.
have the draw tool.
Is it
Yeah, where do we get the draw tool?
Mouse?
I see it to the left.
What did I do? There we go. That ought to do it. Not.
Perhaps you need to X out of that bar that the draw tool is.
Maybe you should click on the mouse one.
And if we get
Mouse
rid
on
of
the end.
that, and we minimize that, and we go click.
Is there's a little tiny arrow at
Oh,
the
you're
very
right.
far corner down there.
Bottom left. I don't know.
Now let's try that.
There you go.
There's more than one way to do this. Isn't there?
Ah,
Okay, what else did they believe? They believed in absolute truth and knowledge. Socrates said that in the very beginning. You can know. Of course, you find it in knowing thyself. You know, the Oracle of Delphi says, know thyself, and everything in moderation. But there is truth, there is knowledge. And so they believe that we are rational human beings. So that's going to come up in the art. What about man? Well, the best way to explain that is to read Pico's Oration on the Dignity of Man in the Renaissance period. But he wrote about this. He said God created man in the middle. He's below the gods. He's below gods, but he's above the beast. He's above the animals. So he's really important. Okay? So how does that come across in art? It comes across in humanism. Well, in philosophy and art and everything else. They believe that there is an orderly universe with beauty. And they will use the words beauty and goodness interchangeably. And what does that look like in art? They're going to strive for symmetry and harmony, balance. I mean, symmetry is a really big word.
Balance, force.
I'm sorry, what?
Bring balance to the force.
Yes.
Jedi.
Yes. And so when you look at Greek art, you're going to see this. And when you go back and we look at the Renaissance, we're going to see a lot of the same things revisited. And what do we do with art? We imitate nature. We're going to copy.
So they weren't realists.
Pardon?
So they were realists.
Realism is an interesting word because, realism says you're painting what you see, but who's always involved?
Well, you are.
The artist is. So they're going to be more idealist,
Okay.
but they still view nature as important.
Okay.
These things are kind of, keep your head wrapped around these things because it's going to change substantially. Okay.
What was that word after art?
Mimesis.
Thank you. Nice.
Okay. So these are the earliest figures that we have of human beings
Oh,
in the
wow.
Greek world. And the Koros is the male version, the Kore the female version. What's the very obvious difference immediately?
Well, the chorus is naked. The chorus is clothed.
We don't see a naked female until the 4th century BC. But the males are always naked. Now, what do you know about the Greek men and nakedness?
They were.
They what?
Like no, that's the Olympics. Yeah.
The Olympics.
They were very comfortable.
Oh,
with it.
yeah.
Yeah, they competed.
The women
In the nude.
were not allowed to watch the
No, they weren't. And they had a sturgill and they scraped the sweat off of them, the leather. I'm sorry, I'm an athlete. I just think that just all sounds very gross to me. But anyway, these figures, we have more than 100 of them, and I have seen both of these. They range in size from about 5 feet to a couple that are 11 feet tall.
Wow. Do you
So-
think those accurately reflected their actual size, or are these?
Well, if you were a Greek athlete, then 11 feet is probably not a bad estimate.
No, I think 11 feet would be way too big for a regular human.
Well,
Yeah.
But
People that giant.
yeah, that's pretty
People that fall
large.
occasionally.
And we don't really
okay,
know
this is exaggeration.
why these were created, but we know they're important.
Okay.
Okay, and they're near what we think are graves. We think they're grave markers, like grave funeral, have something to do with funeral art. And the woman holding her hand, she actually had another piece of her arm. And they'll typically be holding a pomegranate or something like an offering. So there's something there, going on there.
Yeah.
And this is the weirdest thing about it, and I know you aren't going to believe this, but Greeks painted their statues
Oh, that is
Why are these
cool.
because they've weathered through the years. But if you can see, can you tell she's got pink highlights in her hair? When I've stood beside this painting or this statue, she's got her hair's painted. You can tell the little flakes. of
And they
paint.
painted it pink? That's
Well, it was probably painted red.
okay. They have Greeks have red hair?
Red hair?
'Cause that
Probably
was-
not.
So that's really interesting.
The Parthenon statues were
Mhm.
all brightly painted. They have evidences of very, very bright paint on it, which is really weird. I like the marble, but they were painted. They're not doing much, are they?
No.
The male stepping forward, which is completely different, from the Greek world, but they're not really doing much except standing there.
Oh, wait. That means that the whole Renaissance idea was kind of a deception.
What do you mean?
Well, they never painted their statues. They always did them in pure marble. That was kind of an illusion of the time. Oh, my goodness.
I'll even take you one further.
Mhm.
They didn't carve them, they made them out of bronze.
Oh.
Most of them.
Oh.
It's really gonna get bad.
Oh, yeah.
It's, yeah.
The Greeks.
No.
Later, the classical Greek statues are made of. Most of them were.
Okay. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it gets crazy. I love this little smile, don't you? This is a
Yeah.
little archaic. These are archaic. That's the time period, and that's a little archaic smile. So you can always tell when they were done. Okay. But by the 5th century, we get to what we call the classical or golden age of Greece. Now, do we see idealism there?
Yes.
Do you know what the definition of idealism?
But it's also extreme.
Idealism?
There's a higher world, a greater unity beyond reality, greater beauty.
We're trying to create a perfect human
being.
The
Oh,
yeah.
idealistic. And I always say this to my students. Is this idealized? Yes. Because I have never seen a student walk around campus who looks like that. I'm just saying. I'm just really saying. Okay. So he's idealized. He's got, and let me tell you, getting back to what I just said to you, James, see that stump behind his leg?
Mm-hmm.
This is a Roman copy of a Greek original.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
A lot of what we have from the Greek world are actually just copies that the Romans, when they conquered Greece, they got so excited that they just took boatload after boatload after boatload of art back to Rome. But to their credit, they measured and made grids and created exact copies. Now, a lot of these things we believe were in bronze because we have found some of the more recent, in the last 50 to 100 years, we've actually found several Greek statues. And guess where they were? Under the water. The boat might have sunk in the transport or whatever, and they're bronze. And they pulled up these bronze statues.
Wow.
But when you create a copy in marble, you got to balance them. Marble's a whole lot heavier. We won't go into that.
Oh, so they needed the stump to help out.
Yeah, it got to have
That
balance.
is crazy.
Yeah. Now, he's perfect, but he is a human, right? We're looking at humans, yes?
Mhm.
In all their perfection and whatever. He's about ready to throw the discus, but I have it on good authority that is not the pose that you would use to throw a discus. I hate to disappoint you too. This is not quite perfect as you might have thought, but he really looks good, doesn't he? And they're looking, by the 5th century, they're looking at the human body. Now, okay, it's nude, and we might be going, oh my gosh, this is terrible, cover my eyes. And I don't have any problem showing it to you because it's not created for titillation. It's created to say, man is the measure of all things. And that's what one of their scholars said. Man is the measure of all things.
Wow.
They didn't get rid of God. I'm not saying at this point that they still don't believe in their really strange gods, but they're elevating man as a object of beauty. Okay, and that's what you should see here. Now, to prove my point, look at this statue. And again, look what the medium is.
Bronze.
Bronze. This guy is 6'11". I've stood beside him, and you can't take. I'd love to have my picture made with him, but I'm not. But okay, so, but who is he?
Zeus.
What does he look like? A man.
Yeah.
Is this the epitome of humanism?
No.
Yeah.
Well,
God
yeah.
as man.
As man, yeah, I guess you're right.
I mean, how would you create a statue of God?
I don't know.
God, not Jesus, God.
Yeah.
Can you even wrap your mind around that?
No.
No. But here they're presenting their God as man. Okay?
There's a movie I watched recently with Dad for his worldview. He's teaching me, and it's a new age movie. And there's this whole idea that sounds like this is what man can become.
Uh-huh.
Man can become God. Man can become one in God. Yes. And yeah.
And you're going to really see that more and more. Plato said that works of art should ideally conform to some absolute standard. He believed the works of man to be best, but pale imitations of heavenly prototypes or ideals. So, he's advocating for at least some absolute standard. But this is Zeus. Zeus. Okay, so what happens when we go to Rome? Well, you do know that Rome conquers all the Greek world. And by 30 BC, the last Greek city-state has fallen to the Roman Empire. Okay. So they're going to take those Greek statues, but Roman art's kind of different because the Romans borrow from everybody. The Romans are just quite ingenious in that they borrow from the Etruscans, they borrow from the Egyptians, they borrow from the Greeks, and yet they kind of mishmash it all together and make it Roman. Okay?
Kind of like America.
I was just gonna say, sounds like America.
Yeah, which could be a good thing. I'm not, it's kind of interesting. So, but what did they do? Well, we have some very interesting art. I like this. This is one of my favorite Roman art works because the Romans worshipped, and again, they borrowed all the other gods too. They worshipped Persian gods and they worshipped Greek gods. And you do know that the Roman gods have the Greek gods with Roman names, right? So they took those gods. But they also, and they took Egyptian gods, Cyrus and all that. But they also worshipped their ancestors. And each home would have a little room where they would put busts of their ancestors.
Oh, wow.
And they would actually, and they were the first people to cut the heads off and make busts. The Greeks wouldn't have done that. They didn't have the whole body, but the Romans cut the heads off. And then they put this, they would do a wax mask, hopefully when they were still alive, but sometimes if they died, a wax mask, and then create a statue and put it on the shelf. And then when you have a parade or some kind of victory celebration, you can take Uncle Joe and Aunt Ben, or Uncle Ben, and take them down into the parade.
Oh, my.
I think that's so cool.
You have lots of ancestry. You have wagon.
Yeah, you have a big room,
That's supposed to be a farm for them?
Yes, again, it would be not a real tree, but it would be the place where they would put their statue, perhaps.
And it's for the balance of the statue, right?
Yeah, you got to think about all these things. And this is actually a Roman statue, not a Greek statue. Okay, but the Romans did something else. They did all these portraits. The early Romans in the Republic, especially, they were very serious about honesty, integrity, the Republic. These men were going to create the perfect government, and these were going to be men who sacrificed for the good of the country. And so when you see some of these early statues, they're not afraid to be real. Now, this is realism. Can you see the difference between this and idealism? But yet, is there beauty in this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's real.
It's real. And your grandparents don't necessarily look that good sometimes, do they?
Yeah.
I love this guy. I think he looks like somebody's grandpa,
Who looks almost blind.
yeah.
I was thinking Wilton's criminal.
Oh.
He does look
Like a
almost
lumberjack.
criminal.
Yeah, it looks like
He does. It does
A
look
member of the
like
mafia or something? Is that what you're saying? Oh,
Roman
Hurt me.
Capone there.
hurt me. I just love this guy.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
Why are the
Oh, go
eyes
back.
always like that?
They're not always, but they are a lot. Because
they
how do you do eyes?
I mean,
The Romans didn't paint as much as the Greeks.
I mean, you'd think you at least have some circles in there, and you could sculpt the contours,
Mm-hmm.
to a certain degree.
Maybe it's weathered down and you can't see that.
Yeah, that's true.
No, they don't
It looks
carve
pretty
them.
smooth.
Do you
yeah.
know the first person to carve out peoples and do a real definitive carving? Michelangelo.
Really? Really?
Yeah. He always carved his
That is
And we'll look at that when we get there.
So he carved his name.
Yeah. So be careful. My hero. And then by the time you get to the Republic, I mean the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, and I hope you all understand some of this history and you all have this, you have a whole nother thing going on in the art. During the Roman Republic, you have propaganda. The Romans invented propaganda. Talking about rolling out the red carpet. Yes, they did. And so when they created statues of their heroes, they really made them important and impressive. Constantine had a statue that we only have bits and pieces of it, but the head's like 10 feet tall. Wow. Just the head. And the feet are, huge. And we just have bits and pieces. So it must have been very big. Work of propaganda. So a couple things just to know, because art is symbolic. Do you see that on his left leg, there is a little dolphin and a little person?
What is that?
That's a dolphin?
It's a dolphin. The little person sitting on a dolphin,
Oh,
riding it
yeah,
off.
that is really kind of odd.
Isn't that
I
odd?
noticed that. It's a little weird.
Well, it's really weird unless you know the history of Rome. Have you read the Aeneid?
Not half the book. I haven't read it yet. I should. I know.
How is Rome founded?
Oh, it's the dragon's teeth, right?
Romulus and Remus.
Romulus and Remus.
No, dragon's teeth is something else.
Okay. And ultimately Romulus kills Remus, right?
Yeah.
So it's Rome and not Reem. Right? But then who is a descendant of Romulus? Way down the line. Aeneas. Aeneas, that's why the book's called Aeneid, right? But that Aeneas has a special mother. Here's the deal. You know the Odyssey?
Yeah, I've read that one.
Okay. That's the Greek national epic.
Mhm.
Well, when Augustus came along, this is who this is, he said to Virgil, we've got to have an epic, but it's got to be better than the Greeks, right? Well, how do you make your hero better?
You give him better lineage.
You give him better lineage. So who's Aeneas's mom? Venus. Oh.
Of course, there was a reason that they didn't use demigods in the Odyssey, because they wanted to be humanists and say, we can do better.
Exactly.
Exactly, but the Romans didn't care.
But the Romans are not that smart.
Yeah.
They're very practical people. They just borrow something. But Venus came from what? Where'd she
Oh, the
born?
sea.
The sea. And who's her son?
Cupid.
Cupid. So that's Cupid with the wings. So if you were a Roman, you'd go, oh, my God, or my hero, my ruler is descended from gods. He's very important. And if that wasn't enough to tell you how important he was, his breastplate's full of things that would tell you the sun rises and sets with him, and here's his victories. And if that's not enough, if you're still not convinced, and these are warrior clothes, by the way. I'd like to be a soldier and go out to battle with that. It's kind of close, huh? He's standing with Imperator form. Okay, who else borrowed that and thought that was important?
Oh.
As he commanded
American
his troops,
politicians.
as he commanded his troops, all the tanks that would go by.
Was it Churchill? No. Roosevelt? I'm forgetting.
Who watched all it?
Hitler.
Hitler.
Hitler. Oh, yeah.
You know, nothing was wasted on Hitler either, because he thought this is the stance. This is commanding your troops. This is the stance of power. Okay?
So sad that he was
That
so
is
smart
just
and
such
so
a
evil.
classic stance. Like that looks like a guy, a CEO at a business, just like.
So you're supposed to think importance here. This guy's important, he's powerful, etc., etc. However, in 410 AD, something terrible happened. Rome got sacked.
Oh, yeah.
And if you know the Roman Empire lasted about 400 years, 500 years in the West. Okay, so we got to keep this in mind too, because at the fall of Rome, the West goes one way and the East goes another. The East becomes the Byzantine Empire, exactly. Okay? Now, so keep that in your head a little bit too. And eventually the two churches separate. But for right now, there's one church. Because something else incredible happens in Rome. And what is that?
Christianity.
Christianity.
Can I say
Because
something
in
about
the-
that picture real quickly?
Yeah.
I just noticed. He's doing the walking forward hand thing. The
Uh-huh.
Statue of Liberty has basically the same pose.
Oh, you're right.
It's holding the torch.
Yeah, but he has the torch in the place of the finger.
That pose, you're going to see it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a French painting called Liberty Leading the People,
Mhm.
Delacroix. And she's
Yeah,
got
I've
that
seen that with the
same-
flag.
She's got the same pose.
I've seen that. I've seen that painting.
So what happens in this early Christian world? Well, in the early Roman world, Christ is born. Okay? Does that change up things?
Yes.
It might change things a little bit, just a little bit. Okay, so what goes on? Now the whole philosophical worldview changes. Okay, at least for the Christians, right? And ultimately, the Roman Empire. In the early years of the Roman Empire, how did they receive Christianity?
Badly.
It's an underground religion for quite a while.
Yeah. It wasn't. It's important. It wasn't super badly. It was only
No.
until right before the sack that it became really, really bad.
Well, it depends. Under Nero, there's a local,
Yeah.
really bad persecution.
Mhm.
Okay? And then later, from about 303 to 305, horrible, we call it the Great Persecution, because it was a pretty much an empire-wide.
Yeah. Who was that? That was under the guy who was okay
Diocletian.
with it. It was very unusual. He was okay with it until the last year of his reign.
Yeah, and then
And
it
then
got
he-
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He suddenly
So-
started
What was it?
persecution.
That was in
Was it Tertullus? What was his name?
Diocletian.
Diocletian. Yeah.
Yeah. But strangely enough, the greatest persecution is from 303 to 305, and then in 393, guess what? It becomes a legal religion. And the religion, you know, you're going, gosh, Lord, that was fast.
Yeah.
You know, so things are happening. So, but the worldview's changed. Okay, now the ultimate reality is based on God. Okay, truth and knowledge come from God. I mean, you know all this. And when we look at the art, there's a hierarchy. Okay, there's when you look at all the way through the Middle Ages, there's a hierarchy in history. But in the art, we're going to see that very, very quickly. So you got a hierarchy. So when you look at an artwork, who's on the top of the art?
God.
God.
Yeah.
God, and then Jesus, right? Holy Spirit might be in there. The Holy Spirit might be on Jesus' head, depending. Okay, then Ashlyn, Caitlin,
It's close.
angels. Yeah, and then you got your prophets, and you got, you know, your bishops and your church people, okay? So there's a hierarchy in the art. It's very, very important.
The apostles were saints, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll be up there. They'll be up there in the higher levels. And I just say Catholic because the Catholic Church is going to come out of this early church, right? You're all familiar with all that churches, right? You know, and the whole idea of man changes too, right? Because man's created by God, but what do we know about man? What happens in Genesis 3? He falls. And no longer is man the measure of all things, right? That doesn't compute in a Christian worldview, does it? Okay? And who created the world?
God.
Christian God. And now art has a purpose. It's to be instructive. And so art changes quite a bit. So let's look at some really early paintings.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you're in the early years of Christianity and there's some persecution, what are you going to do?
Gonna meet in the basement.
Well, you're going to meet maybe in secret some, but how can you talk to one another if your faith is in secret? How can I share
The symbol.
symbols?
Mm.
Okay, so very early on, Christians start using symbols. Okay, so you have symbols that you might know.
Fish.
Yeah, you know. Oh wait, that's not
Zero. Alright. Oh no, I haven't seen that one.
right. I can't get it in my head when I'm trying to draw you. This is Greek letters.
Zero.
Oh, yes, the one
Or-
for Christ.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's like a cross on the other side
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm missing something.
Yeah. It's like she's getting there.
I'm getting there. Give me time. It'll come. So even in the catacombs, the Christians buried people.
Mhm.
They didn't burn them; they buried them, and so they had to have a place to bury them. And so they got permission to bury them outside the city of Rome, which is now inside the city of Rome, because that's what happened. Rome just took over. You might have heard that they met in the catacombs. That's not true,
Oh.
because the catacombs have really narrow hallways. There's not enough room to meet in a catacomb. Plus, imagine this: if you think hairballs make you get grossed out, can you imagine being in all these dead bodies?
The rats and the scorpions and the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think so. But anyway, and so there's some paintings in the catacombs. They're very maybe elementary. I mean, I don't think we'd give this guy a 10 for artistic ability, right? But let's see what the symbols are. First of all, and this kind of it's falling apart a little bit, but these are called orant figures. That just means praying figures. So when you go to a contemporary Christian church and everybody's raising their hands, well, that's what they did in the early years. Those are praying figures. Okay? That's what they're doing. In the center, we have what? Can you tell?
Adam. No.
It's hard to imagine, but that's a sheep.
Oh, it's a good
A
shepherd.
good shepherd.
Jesus.
Okay? This becomes a very, very, very well used symbol. Christ is a good shepherd. And the reason for that is, even in the Roman art, a shepherd was seen as a benevolent, kind person. So you could do a shepherd and nobody would think that you're referring to Christ necessarily. But as a Christian, you could go, oh, he's my good shepherd,
Mhm.
right? So that would make that connection. Then around here, and I know you can't really tell what this is, but these little semicircles are stories of Noah.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, the tree. He's lying under the tree in the bottom one, and then there's the fish.
So what would Noah have to do with anything?
Oh wait, no.
He got the ark was like
Wrong
a
one.
symbol of Christ,
Exactly.
bringing the world, people to new world location.
Exactly. Symbol of Christ. You know, he's in the belly of the whale 3 days, resurrected, the whole bit. Okay.
Wait, no, isn't that Jonah?
I mean Jonah. I didn't.
Yeah,
okay,
you were saying
there
Noah.
we
I thought I had the
go.
wrong
Sorry,
one.
sorry.
But it's Jonah. I was like,
Jonah.
but it looks like pictures of Jonah. It can't be Noah.
I think we were talking about the same person. We just weren't using the same.
Yeah,
name.
we were using the same.
Okay.
Everyone gets
Thank
those
you.
two confused.
Just keep me lined up. Yeah. So those are all important. Now, did they use the cross? Well, they used the cross, the symbol of the cross, but they didn't use the crucifixion for many, many, many years in art, because the crucifixion was horrible.
Yeah.
It was just horrible, and they didn't want to do that. They also did not, for a while, they didn't do art at all. Just so you know, in the early years of Christianity, not because of the commandment that says do not make graven images, but simply because pagans made art,
Oh, wow.
and they just kind of stayed clear away from that. But so.
Why? No.
Yeah, don't let the pagans have everything. And there's another, this is a mosaic. Mosaics made out of little pieces of glass.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
those are so cool.
Amazing.
They are so cool. This is in Ravenna. It's absolutely beautiful.
Imagine how long would take you
Oh
Oh
yeah.
my
put
goodness.
all that together.
I would go nuts after like half of one of those little circles. Like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah, and there's hundreds of these mosaics in Ravenna. This is Ravenna, Italy. But there's Jesus, he's a good shepherd, and there's his cross. But again, it's just the cross. We don't have the crucifixion. And this is a later image. So we're beginning to show Christ, as Christ, not just
Yeah, they show the halo,
Halo.
like that sign of divinity.
And the halos are a real interesting thing. We're not sure where they came from. We see them very, very early in Syrian pagan religion, but we're not quite sure why Christians picked up this idea of a halo. And I'm sure some artists wish they hadn't, because they cause all kinds of problems with art. How do you do a halo, and not get it in somebody's face? For example, see? I mean, how do you do halos? It's just very interesting. Now, one of the things that you're going to see early on is the creation of what we call icons. Icons. And this is going to cause all kinds of trouble for the Catholic Church and the Byzantine Church, eventually. This is a 6th century, so this is still pretty early. And who is this? Mary.
Baby Jesus.
Jesus. He's such a cute baby. Not.
Yeah.
He doesn't even look like a baby, does he?
No.
Because they do not they create him as a little God. A little man God. And usually he's doing the peace robe sign, peace.
Really?
Yeah. So it's
Oh, wow.
peace.
That's cool.
I don't, and it's a blessing, it's a blessing.
Okay.
Okay. But
Oh wow.
I don't, and he doesn't become a baby for a long time. He's a little man. This is an icon, and interestingly enough, the Virgin Mary is huge in Christian art, Roman Catholic art. It's kind of interesting. In Ephesus, you had the seat of Diana, the god Diana, and they made a lot of money off of her and her cult. Well, of course, Paul goes to the Ephesians, and and so now they gotta get rid of Diana, but what are they gonna do?
Replace her with Mary.
They replace her with Mary, and you have this cult of the Virgin that really grows and grows and grows and grows. And so you have images of the Virgin Mary. You have more of those than you do of Jesus. Yeah, you really do.
That's
Everybody
sad.
paints Jesus or paints Mary. And you have these full frontal images. These are called icons, and they're the Catholics would say we don't worship the image; they just remind us of the person. But there's a very thin line between venerating the person and worshiping the image.
Mhm.
It's like pray to it and
Yes.
stuff like that.
And kiss it and all that.
Yes.
I would.
And by the 7th century, you have a huge controversy, 8th century rather, 700. You have a controversy. And in the West, they have all these icons. But in the East, in the Byzantine Empire, there's even more. I mean, they're in their homes, they're everywhere. But a king Leo says, or Pope Leo says, we're going to quit worshiping the icons. No, he's king. And we're going to take them out of our churches and everything else. Well, the West says absolutely not. So there's big controversy. And this is one of the things that causes the ultimate split between the Roman Catholic Church and the Byzantine, the Orthodox Church. Is this, how do you use images in your church? Now, bottom line is, they're still full of images, both churches. Full of images. They have lots and lots and lots of statues of Mary. They have lots of artworks of Mary. Very, very interesting. The other thing, there's no ground line there hardly. This is a Byzantine work, and you can tell it because it looks like they're puppets.
Yeah.
Oh, it does. You're
We
right.
do. The Byzantine world is very, very spiritual. The western side of the empire stays pretty realistic, down to earth. But the Byzantine world gets very, very, very spiritual.
Interesting.
Check that out.
That's really different.
This is actually in a church near Athens, Greece. Pantocrator, he is the creator of the universe. I always like to show this one. This is absolutely gorgeous because it's got a lot of gold in it. Does this help you understand why the cult of the Virgin became popular? Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Yeah, who seems to be accessible?
Mary.
Mary.
Yes.
When you create God as judge, Mary becomes accessible. Mother of God. Wow. I can go to her. By the 9th century
In the movie.
and into the 10th century, in the West especially, the primary form of art, Christian art, well, let's just say that all art's Christian for a long time, but the primary form is going to be illuminated manuscripts. Do you know what's happening by this point in history, by the 9th century?
Well, I know the monasteries were there.
Yeah, the monasteries.
It's the Gallic invasion, right?
Yes, you get waves of barbarians, coming
Mhm.
down for quite a while.
Why
Rome
were they coming
falls.
down? I always forget that.
Why?
Yeah.
They get warm. And I'm being halfway facetious, but halfway true. I
Yeah.
mean, what's down here that they don't have? Warmth and stuff.
Yeah. Better question. What isn't down? What isn't down here that they don't have?
So they're coming down here and they're taking stuff and they're so they're penetrating into the south.
Warmth and stuff.
Oh, have you ever been to Scandinavia? It's cold up there.
Being in Alaska, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you just gotta go sometimes and get stuff.
So you heard about those people down there. But what's happening is the feudal system and the manorial systems are beginning. People are closing in on themselves, right? For protection. And the monasteries are keeping things alive. Education alive, art alive. You do have a little bit of a renaissance with Charlemagne. He's really promotes education and it's the Carolingian Renaissance. But really, these small books, well, they're not so small, they're the art form. You don't do statues because statues are expensive. You don't have as much of that kind of stuff, but you have a lot of these books. This is the most famous Irish artwork in the world.
And it's
The book,
pages full of it, right? Like just
Pages,
pages like that.
This is an initiation or an initial page, so you can see the letter. Some of them are just purely decorative, and those are called carpet pages, like Persian carpets. And some of them actually have words in them, but you have lots and lots of.
How did they
these
get
kind of
so
books.
small?
I don't know how they got such perfect edges. Did they have rulers or forms of rulers?
They had
Because
something.
because I mean,
Yeah,
it's so straight and perfect.
Perfect ages. How'd they get the surface?
yeah. This is if it's too much of a rabbit trail question, we can talk about it later. But I love Celtic design so much. But I'm guessing that originally came from more of the pagan. Would you say that a lot of Celtic design actually has a lot of pagan symbolism? Or I'm guessing this wouldn't.
They probably, I'm sure it's partially pagan, but there are also some things that are just Irish.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the Romans had that meander, or the Greeks had that meander pattern?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a Greek thing. The Irish have what we call interlace, and it's that.
Yeah, they got the knots down at the bottom there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's, you're going to see that in Celtic art.
Mm-hmm. It's so cool.
It is very cool. This work and you look at these pages, they have little hidden mice in them.
Oh my.
I mean, it's like,
wow.
where's Waldo? I know you're probably. But there's things, there's little beasts in there, little animals.
I see a lot of Triskells, where there's 3 arms coming out and
Yeah.
curved. I know 3 was a big deal then
There's
because
a
the
face.
Trinity. So
And I
Yeah,
think
there's a head.
There's a head. Yeah.
There's 2, but there's like one that's just a head.
Where's the other one? Where's the
On
other
the
one?
top.
Oh, I see
There's
it.
one.
And then there's one
How
at
did
the
I
top.
not
That's a
notice
face. I know. I like came right to it, like there's a face there.
Does this remind you of playing cards?
yeah.
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah,
Is
this
that
is-
what they're based on? Is that what?
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
This came before playing.
Well, it's true.
Um,
Look at something else
Yeah,
that's
the
in
monks
before
were playing
playing
cards and got inspired.
cards. Yeah.
a 12th century writer wrote of this work, examine it carefully and you will penetrate to the very shrine of art. You will make out intricacies so delicate and subtle, so concise and compact, so full of knots and links with colors so fresh and vivid that you might think all this was the work of an angel, not a man.
Oh wow.
So there you go.
That's amazing. They were
Yeah.
amazing. I don't think a modern person could
blow
do
it
that
up to the size of the
thing.
screen.
like with the materials they had. I
Yeah,
think
and
they
then
would
you
be
can really
impossible.
see it.
Oh, my
Yeah.
goodness.
Even the high tech, I don't think they could. I mean, it's just so developed.
And I will tell you that I'll try to find the cover of this. The cover of some of these books, they're made for abbots and bishops, and they weren't for your, we wouldn't have one, to say. But the covers have jewels on them.
And,
And they didn't facet their jewels. You know what I mean by facet? They didn't put, they rounded them, cabochoned them. So
Oh, beautiful.
yeah, they're cool. So the medieval world, we call it Romanesque, and I will have to mention a couple of architectural features. It's still in the West and in the East. By 1054, the Western Church and Eastern Church split. So you have the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East. And they do go in different directions. They're still Catholic-based, but there's some differences. So you have the beginning of cathedral building. And this is St. Marco in Venice, Italy. Those are all, I just want to say, those are all mosaics.
Oh my word.
Because it's in Venice.
Wow.
You can't have fresco because it would get wet and damp and it would just be awful. So the only art form that they had pre-oil was mosaics. This is called gold leaf. So you take glass, you have clear glass. They're pretty good glaziers by then. Put a layer of gold leaf and then another layer of glass. And then you chip it. So can you imagine how expensive this church wall is?
Yeah.
Church decoration became extremely, extremely important. And I will say controversial. You know, do you spend bazillions of dollars to decorate your church or not? Romanesque churches, they're large, but they're not as large as, well, let me give you this symptom first. This is an entryway to a door frame.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that should be otan, not otum. It's an N. It's a misspelling. Can you tell what the subject matter of this is?
I'm gonna guess the guy in the middle's Christ.
Oh, you're good. Okay,
There are a
correct.
lot of halos.
Yeah, there are. There aren't any halos on the guys in the bottom.
Yeah.
They have no that hell.
Looks like they're
Are
round.
those the poor,
This
miserable,
hell
regular
down there.
people?
Uh-huh.
And then you have the saints around, and then above there there's the angels
Like
ministering
the
to Christ.
saints on earth or
Yeah.
like the angels, because I see on the wings.
So if Christ's in the center,
Oh.
hell's on the bottom, what's the process? What's going on here?
Oh, Christ doesn't go down to hell.
It's,
No.
His
it's
feet
the
stop.
last judgment.
It's the Last Judgment.
Mhm.
This became a very important subject matter to put above your doors at your churches. What are you supposed to think when you go in your church?
Oh,
It's a good thing I'm at church,
Yeah.
I'm in church. right? Because I'm going to go to hell if I don't go to church. And because you know, the Roman Catholic Church has a sacramental system, and you got to have the sacraments or you can go to hell. And it's kind of an interesting. Notice one thing, Gislibertus. This is his name. So write that down because when you have children, you might need that name.
Yeah,
I call him
maybe
Gisli for short. I just think
Gis-
that's a great name.
Gisli.
But I want to point out that we know his name. This is very unusual because in the church you did your work for the church and for God. You didn't do it for public acclaim. So we don't know most artists' names.
Wow.
It's very unusual that we would actually know his name. Okay, and he's fantastic. His art is just so fantastic. But you know, you have demons who are pushing down. They're balancing out the scales, and demons pushing down on pulling down on the scales because they'll take them to hell.
Oh, wow.
I think Gislibertus is almost as bad as Clive Staples. C.S. Lewis is
Yeah.
Clive Staples.
Wait,
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting name.
so they're using scales in here to determine who goes to heaven?
Yeah.
Wow, that's creepy. That is
That
so
is a
creepy
little-
how fast it went wrong.
Well, it
Wow.
went wrong within the first century.
Yeah.
So
So sad. Wow.
it is very sad.
It was important to note there were lots of revivals during this period that led up to the revival.
And I think there are a lot of Christians
Yeah.
throughout
Yeah.
this time period. I mean,
They're
there
Kind
were,
of like now.
yeah, kind of like that.
And they had a lot right that we don't have right.
Right.
It's
I would
important to note
agree.
that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then we move into the Gothic part. And
Stained glass window.
have any of
Wow.
you been to the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C.?
I have not been.
That was one of my thoughts for that third day. Stop by the National Cathedral.
Let's look into that.
Because on the
Wow.
top floor they have a museum of how cathedrals are built.
That would, yeah.
It's
That'd be so
fantastic.
fun.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. So what makes Gothic? Stained glass, primarily. It also has fine buttresses. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And
the big ones.
it has the weight is actually being distributed, so that's different from Romanesque. And it has thinner walls because you've got fine buttresses. Well, it seems Romanesque churches have 14 feet walls. Because you had to. But anyway, stained glass. And of course, who's in that picture?
Mary.
Most Gothic cathedrals are dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Notre Dame, Our Lady.
I thought it was a man.
No. I know it looks
He
kind of
looks
weird.
like he has a beard.
Well, that's a very
Uh,
masculine face.
Yeah, it is a very masculine face.
You can see the
Doing the
flowing
peace sign
hair.
again.
And she's holding
Baby Jesus in her
baby
lap.
Jesus.
He looks
Doing the
like a
peace
little
sign.
man.
Whatever.
Doing the peace sign.
Oh yeah, he actually, he's got the, I know. She actually looks more feminine if we had a closer view. I promise.
Okay.
But Gothic cathedrals, and this is the one where Sujet, he talks about light, and he created the stained glass so that there would be light flowing into the church. And before you think of it as a bright church, it's not. It's a very diffuse light. It's almost like these blinds because it's coming through the color of the stained glass. Now it does make that stained glass reflect all over the floors. They're absolutely gorgeous. I mean, stained glass is beautiful. There's no two ways about it. And there it looks like inside.
Whoa.
Now, well, this is Notre Dame, but a Gothic cathedral looks like this. In its original, they would not have seats. They would have stood. So that'd be kind of hard to do. These churches are so large. I can't even begin to tell you
Wow.
that you could have. I've been to some of these churches. I've been to Notre Dame in a full special mass, and I could have walked around the whole church and would not have disturbed the service.
Wow.
Because, and the same thing with St. Peter's. You know, you could put thousands and thousands and thousands of people in these churches. They're huge. I don't think we could build one today. I don't think we could ever. I don't think we could afford to build one.
Wow.
And they were
Wow.
built over, like you said, somebody we were talking about earlier, a lot of time, a lot of just sacrifice, which begs the whole question that we need to talk about sometime. Should we build these kind of churches?
Do you know how this would compare scale-wise to like the Bristol Speedway or something?
To be fair, the Bristol Motor Speedway is basically glorified, what's the word? Construction scaffolding.
Yeah.
To be very fair.
That's fair.
Glorified construction
But it's
scaffolding.
so big and massive.
Yeah.
It's kind of,
Now, what was impressive is when they
something
made
the
a
size
football
of.
stadium
Right.
inside of the Bristol Motor Speedway. That was impressive.
yeah.
It will fit inside the pyramid. I can tell you that. That gives you some sense about the pyramid. But we'd have to look that up because I don't know how big. I don't know what the range of the speedway is. But these are huge. Okay. So when we get into artworks, we're going to look in this the later part of the Middle Ages. We're going to see a lot of this kind of stuff. Again, back to our icon kind of images. This is Two Boys, Madonna enthroned. Of course, this is a Mary again. There's little Jesus. She's pointing to Jesus. Just to point out a couple of things, this is a very Byzantine influenced work. And why do I say that? The Byzantine world tended to make flat art. Does that look flat?
Yeah, it does.
It does. And boy, those silly halos. You know, what do you do with a halo? You know, you will notice that Jesus always has a cross on his halo.
Hmm.
Oh.
So you'll know Jesus. And also the Byzantine artists created lines. They're very linear. They didn't use a lot of modeling to create dimension, three-dimensional space. They used a lot of lines. So this is a very common kind of art for the period, in Italy especially. And then enter Giotto. He has been considered the most revolutionary artist in the history of art.
Whoa. Okay.
Now you're going to look at that and go, okay, great. I don't see
Yeah.
it. Right? So let's compare, just to see. If you think about these two works being done within 20 years of each other.
Oh, it
22
is
years.
really crazy.
So this is what they were doing. Okay, this is more your typical 13th century image. What's different between this one and this one?
Okay, so
Perspective.
perspective. But you know, another thing, he's okay with letting the halos cover up the faces.
Yeah.
He lets that happen. He doesn't like in this; they're all separated proportionally. But in this one, he's okay with letting it cover up.
Now,
In fact-
but James, you're onto something there. So why does he have to do that?
To let them cover up the face.
Yeah.
To make it look more realistic.
Yes, but why?
It's
Depth.
closer together.
Picture
Depth.
has depth.
Why does it have
Oh,
depth, April?
because here you go.
He's got some shading in there, and the lines, like her step is coming out,
Mm-hmm.
and the people are going back.
Mm-hmm. See, he has to put the halos in
light.
front of him because there's people behind people,
Yeah.
Okay.
right?
Okay. I see what you're saying. Because in that one, everything kind of goes up,
Yeah.
and you don't have a lot of depth.
There's no depth. This is flat. And you just said something else very important. What about the steps?
It's coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like he's got shading on the sides there, and the lines give it that.
If you've got steps, where do the steps go?
Forward.
Into
Into
space,
into-
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's three-dimensional. What else is going on here?
She's not in blue.
Well, that probably was blue, to be honest.
Oh,
with you.
okay.
It's probably a bit faded. But,
Oh wow, that's great.
And these are huge. These are altarpieces. And strangely enough, there's three of them in one room in the Uffizi Gallery, and they're 12 or 15 feet tall. They're big.
Jesus doesn't have the cross in his halo.
That's what I understood.
I think he probably does. We've just not seen it very
It's
well.
the same with the robes. It's just
Yeah,
same with
I'm not 100% sure,
Okay.
but I think he probably does. What else is different?
She's dressed kind of rich.
Okay.
She's got some trimming on her wrap thing
Yeah.
and her shirt. And
Mhm.
And just the whole style, like it looks more realistic. Like that, I mean, it looks, the one on the left one looks like a tapestry, and that one just looks more real. There's more depth, there's more shading. They look more like,
Realism.
yeah.
He has brought back realism.
Hmm.
There's a real body under there. There are real breasts under there. There's a real knee under there. She's a real person, right? I mean, even Jesus has a real knee.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Three-dimensional space. She's sitting in a niche, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So these are pretty radical things. They haven't been doing them that way. Okay, let me tell you what else he brought back. Or he brought, and we know that we had this in the Roman art. We just don't have any examples because it's all industry. But what's in there that we haven't seen so far in the things I've showed you?
Scale.
Yes.
It's a scene from scripture, an actual like physical scene versus like an icon.
Yes. And we've seen that, and now we're seeing this three-dimensional space because look, there's people behind people behind people. Look at this. Isn't this crazy?
People's backs,
If I turn my back to you, what do you assume?
but you're not paying attention.
Well, not that, but think about if I turn my back and I'm humped over, what?
You're
You're
looking.
looking away.
Yes, but I have a front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what am I doing? I'm taking
Turn
out.
around. Oh, it's three-dimensional.
It's
space.
three-dimensional. I'm
Yeah.
taking up
Yeah.
space, right? So that's pretty crazy. But look at their faces. Look at these angels.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Very
emotion.
expressive. Yeah.
Deep physical emotion.
Yeah.
This is my savior. He's died, right? And what's also interesting too is, I mean, look at her, the mother of Jesus. You know, I can't even
Wow,
imagine
that's cool.
any more expression. But look where Jesus is too. He's right here.
Yeah.
He's in our space.
He's in the midst of us.
Mm.
So that's in itself is emotional too.
That's cool.
So Giotto brought emotion and drama and three-dimensional space and realism. This is huge.
Mhm.
It's huge. It doesn't seem like much to us because we're so sophisticated, but it is. It's huge for the period. He also painted blue secco on dry plaster and it flaked off. This is in the Arena Chapel.
Basically.
Huh?
Oh, those lines in the sky, are those like from where he put the plaster?
It's just the plaster. Yeah, it would have all been blue.
Wow.
This is a fantastic
Was
fresco
this
series.
all received favorably?
It was received not only favorably, but people were going, whoa,
Wow.
what has he done? I mean, it was just like shocking in
Yeah.
a wonderful way, you know.
Wow.
This was in a
Space.
huge, not huge,
Wow.
a small
High
chapel,
definition.
and he ended up
Yeah,
having a
right.
huge school of workers, and he did a lot of
3D.
work. This is in the Arena Chapel in Padua, but he also did the paintings for the Franciscan cathedral in Assisi. So he's a very popular artist. He had made a lot of money, lots of money. And then we go to the Renaissance. Okay, so we already talked about the Renaissance looking back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking back to what? The early Greeks and the Romans. And they're going to borrow Roman architecture. We didn't talk about that, but they will borrow Roman architecture. So what's going to be changed? Well,
Idealism kind of comes back into play in conjunction with humanism.
humanism, idealism, rationalism.
Yeah.
I didn't mention this, but the Greeks figured out mathematically body proportions. This is a rationalism, you know that? And you know Leonardo da Vinci's
Yeah.
Vitruvian Man? And I did say Leonardo did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's so good. You know, that's true. You know, there's measurement.
Yeah.
The Greeks figured out the grid to make the perfect human being. So your arm is supposed to be a certain percentage of your height, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They figured it all out and made it perfect. So you
Wow.
create the perfect man. They also said, how old are you, James?
20.
20. Oh, you're close. How old are you?
23.
Ooh. Oh, you're over the hill.
21.
Yeah. The Greeks said the perfect age is between 18 and 21.
Whoa.
And after that, you go downhill physically. So
I
sorry.
can attest to that.
I'm so sorry.
I'm in the front.
Oh, yeah, all right. Yeah, all right. We've been past that a long time. But anyway, so the Renaissance is going to go back and look at that idealism and that humanism. They're going to come back. They're also going to do something very interesting. They're going to focus on the individual. Interesting. That man is the measure of all things. Pico says nothing is as great as man. Individualism. Now, do you know what other movement takes place at the same time as the Renaissance?
Reformation,
The
right?
Reformation. Now, have you ever thought about that? What's motivating the Renaissance just might be motivating the Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
Same
Yeah.
thing, different
Same.
response.
Exactly. Individualism. Man is the measure of all things. Nothing is more wonderful than man. What is it? How does that show itself in the Reformation?
We need to
Questioning
come
of
back
authority.
to it's kind of the opposite. The Bible, the right of people to read the Bible, understand the
I
Bible,
can
and
read and
Bi-
interpret the Bible for myself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How about the idea of if we go back and start digging up ancient Greek literature, Erasmus, what does he do?
He translates the Latin Vulgate, makes a new Latin translation.
Well, he
Not
Excuse me,
Latin,
Greek.
Greek.
yeah, he compiles the Greek
Greek.
text.
So he
He's
used.
trying to get a pure Greek.
So he kind of failed. He used the Latin. He translated from the Latin back into Greek.
Yes, but
Now
he also dug up the
he goes back to the Greek,
Greek.
and he compiles a
Really?
Greek text.
Okay, I thought
Yeah,
that
it's a
he
Greek
used.
story.
I thought he went back to the. I may be wrong about that. I thought he used the Latin at some point.
That was
He
back to
gets
the
all the
sources.
Greek.
Okay.
He gets
Yeah.
Greek,
Okay.
multiple Greek,
I was wrong with that.
ancient Greek texts. So it's kind of interesting that these two things are being generated by the same kind of ideas.
It is.
Do what?
I said it is.
It is. It is. Okay. So, and let me say something else. Did the Renaissance people know they were Renaissance people? Yes. They knew that they were different. They knew that they were great. Man is great.
Oh my word.
Give us chocolate cake or something. I don't know. See, they look back at the Middle Ages that they called the Dark Ages, right?
Mm-hmm.
They weren't as dark as they thought. But they said, you know what? We've lost our absolute standards. We've lost our ideals. We're going to go back and learn. We need to borrow from them to get us back on track. Okay? Now, what did the Middle Ages have? Chivalry.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 you know, here comes the horse, the white horse, and I love chivalry. Can I just say that? I want somebody to open the door for me, male, you know, and put their coat down over the mud puddle and all that kind of stuff. Right, Philip? Right, James?
Stabbed by
Yes.
feminism and died at the sliding door.
Well, you know, what can we say? Now, I will also say, and so they looked back at that stuff and they went, that's not going to be a good code for life. So let's do something different. So they went back to look at the ancient world. And so, but let me say that in its early forms, the Renaissance was not anti-church. It was not anti-clerical. It was not anti-God. Okay? And you're still going to have a lot of religious painting. I mean, the majority of the art's going to be religious for the Catholic Church. Just so you understand all that. So, now I want you to tell me what's different that we haven't been seeing for a while.
Idealism. You've got the ideal human form.
Nudity.
Yeah.
See, in that whole, in the Greek world we had nudity, in the Roman world we had nudity, and then the church came along. And they went, covered up, right? And strangely enough, after this was created in 1427, in about 1500, a person came in, this was in a little small chapel, and came in and said, we're going to cover up this nudity. And so they went in and painted leaves on all the nudity. And it's not, just in the last 20, 30 years, have they been cleaned. Wow. This is in the Brancacci Chapel in Florence. Okay?
That's just so many.
So what did the Renaissance give us? It also went back and looked at rationalism. Man, we're thinkers, okay? We're thinkers. So what can we do? Well, we can figure out all the major things in art. The Renaissance gave us perspective. It figured it out. Some of the greatest innovations in all of the art came during the Renaissance. Masaccio worked with atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective. Perspective. What are we talking about when we're talking about perspective?
Where you're looking from.
Yes, and
how things get smaller and smaller in the distance.
exactly. We're talking about how we can create three-dimensional space, right? How does that look on a flat surface? Well, there's a couple ways of doing that. And we've already talked about one yesterday, didn't we?
The lines. The
Lines
going in.
create three-dimensional space. But atmospheric perspective is when you actually use modeling, shading, and the atmosphere. Because if you look back, when you look at a distance, what happens? Like it's blurry.
It's darker.
It depends. It can get lighter. It depends on what.
True.
You
But there's
know,
a
what
change in shading.
there's a change in shading, and it just kind of blurs, doesn't it? You can't. It's hazy. And so the artists are looking at that and they're figuring this out. Okay? I think this is one of the saddest works in all of art history. Don't you?
Yeah, they'll be cast out.
They're being cast out. And the angel's serious. I mean, this angel's getting rid of it. I mean, she's got the sword, he's got the sword, she's got the sword. But look at the anguish. Ugh. You know, it's that moment they go, oh, we have messed up so bad. You know, I think it's very sad. So they're using atmospheric perspective. What's another innovation? In the north, they invent oil painting. Ooh. Why is that important? Initially, it was more expensive, but they did figure that out.
Colors are sharp.
The colors are so refined. You know, you can mix up oil paints that are just fantastic, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
What else can you do with oil paint that you can't do with other types of paint?
You can rework it.
Yes. If you don't like it, just paint over it, right? Can't do that in fresco. You can maybe chip it all out. Can't do that in mosaics, for heaven's sakes. And can you imagine sculpture?
Oh
You know,
my.
every time I
Wow.
think of Michelangelo carving the Pietà, I think, what if you had just made one?
Yeah.
You just keep getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
So the 16-foot statue is now 4 feet. But oil painting can be reworked, and it can be, you can have details,
Yeah.
very fine details. Okay,
Mhm. Is that the Pope? Or is that Jesus?
that would be God/Jesus,
Okay.
right? It's got the triple tiara, which is Pope's hat, but that means he's God. And it's kind of interesting. Van Eyck is a master of oil painting and detail. I wish I could just show you some details. This is the from the Book of Revelation. It's the altar of the Lamb. Okay, so what do we got here? We got God. Well, he's the King of Heaven. Okay, but he's probably Jesus. You know, both together. Maybe even the Trinity. But here's, well, let's go back. So who's this?
I'm guessing it's Mary.
Mary.
Mary. She's got it blue, and she's also reading. This is another symbol I didn't tell you about yesterday, but Mary is very often in the scripture because the theory is, the tradition is, that she's reading from the book of Isaiah, the passage that said, "In a virgin will conceive and give birth to a son," and supposedly Mary's sitting there going,
Wow. Wow.
so she's reading. Who's this? Hair, shirt, and all.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. Okay, he's pointing the way, right? Jesus.
Mm.
Okay,
Eve.
Adam and Eve. I don't know what they're doing up there in heaven, but there they are. I'm sure they're in heaven. And what are these?
Musicians.
Yeah,
Worshipers.
but they're in heaven.
The hosts, singers,
Saints.
saints, angels.
Angels.
Okay, they don't look like angels.
I
They
know,
look
but,
like
you know,
50,
this is
girls
Van
from the
Eyck's.
50s.
Huh?
The style of the girls almost looks like 50s.
It's very. They
So
don't even look
cool.
that young, do they?
Yeah.
His version of angels. But I always tell my students that this is evidence that the non-instrumentalists are wrong. I'm just like, and then you've got the Feast of the Lamb, celebration of the Lamb, and you've got people coming from what? 4 corners of the earth, right?
Oh,
To worship
wow.
the Lamb.
That's cool.
And so there he is, Frost, because he's going to the sacrifice. This is an incredibly gorgeous painting.
Mm-hmm. So detailed.
And the other thing that I want you to know about this painting, how many of you have seen The Monuments Men? The Monuments Men. Here, write that down. The Monuments Men. It's a painting. It's a movie you need to watch. Do you know what Hitler did when it came to the art?
I do not.
He stole it.
Hmm.
He had a whole entourage of men. Hitler wanted to be an artist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was an architect for a while.
He's a painter.
Painter too, yeah.
And he could not get in to the school he wanted to go into because he wasn't in it. And he was angry. He was very angry. But he wanted to own all the world's greatest art. So he stole it. So even before he would send his army into a area, he would know what art's there, and he'd go steal.
Wow.
And as the troops went in, the art went out, and they hid it in different places. And the monument men, the monuments men.
Oh, I've seen the
Is a
commercial.
story.
Yeah, they were looking for it, right?
Yeah, they're going. What they did is they wanted to find the art, but they couldn't just send anybody in to find the art.
Yeah.
They had to have people who knew what
Knew
art.
what they were looking for.
Yeah,
So it's all these professors.
yeah.
With these, yeah. Oh, I did. I never
volunteered.
saw that. I was like, I want to think that.
That is cool.
And some of them died. I mean, this was a serious thing.
Wow.
But why do I tell you this whole entire story? They were looking for many, many pieces because Hitler stole lots of art. But the 2 major pieces was one Michelangelo's statue and this altar.
Wow. Oh, my word.
It was taken. Now this is huge. It's probably 20 feet long.
Wow.
12 feet high, tall. But
Are we gonna
it
get
got
to see
recovered.
this?
It was recovered. They did get the art. Okay.
Is there any chance that we get to see this?
You have to go to Ghent, and that's in Belgium.
Right.
So put it on your bucket list.
Get into the, yeah, during our trip to
I mean,
Washington.
it's not like it's out of the way.
It's just a little side trip.
Oh my God, the
A little bit
3D
northwest or northeast.
Oh wow.
Now
That's
here
Looks
is
like a cool
one of
guy.
my favorite northern painters.
That's awesome.
German
That is really good.
Oh, it's a self-portrait?
self-portrait.
Yeah, you thought it was
He
Jesus,
did
didn't
many.
No.
He did
No, I didn't.
many self-portraits.
Did anyone do a signature like him?
Not that I know of. He's unique in that. And he always did his own signature. So you can always see his work. Now, brick.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you
Yes.
can see it up there, 1500.
And he would put the
Yeah.
date on it too. He'd write stuff, but here's his signature.
That is so cool.
Now, Dürer was deeply religious. And he, Thomas à Kempis, do you know Thomas à Kempis?
Vaguely familiar.
The Imitation of Christ?
Yeah, I remember that work. I've read it yet though.
It's kind of like a devotional kind of thing, but it's a very deeply spiritual work where you literally work on imitating Christ with your senses. And Dürer did that. He read that, he studied that, he did that. And he wanted to be like Christ. Okay? He did lots of self-portraits. This is, I think, the most important one he did. Now, did you think it was Christ?
I kind of thought it was Christ.
Okay.
I just.
Do you think we're supposed to think of Christ?
Maybe. And there's some similar.
Yeah, in
He
some
just
way.
he looks so northern though that it just like I was thinking I see that and I think okay northern I don't know Jesus.
Is that an inverted blessing signal symbol.
Yeah, I noticed that just now.
Mhm,
He's got
yeah.
the two fingers. Blessing. Bless me, please.
I think
Yeah.
there's a definite connection to Christ. Matter of fact, I know there is because I read about it. But he wants to imitate Christ. It's not in a sacrilegious kind of way. It's in a, I want to be like Christ.
Yeah, he's got the blessing turned inward. That's pretty.
Mhm.
I mean, it
Pretty
amazes me
interesting.
how these people think about all these things while they're painting.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, it takes like, okay, straight line. No, straight line. That's me.
Well, he was so detailed, and if you get a chance, Google him and look at his nature paintings, and they're hard the two dots on the view. He painted a bunny rabbit. I mean, you can just feel the hair. I mean,
Wow.
so intricate. I mean, turf of grass. I mean, he's just a tuft of grass. He's just an amazing painter. But someone came to him supposedly one time, an artist, fellow artist, said, "I want to borrow the brush you paint hair with." And he started handing him brushes, and he said, I want the brush you paint hair with. And he said, well, I paint hair with all. You know, he's just a meticulous artist. Here's what he said toward the end of his life. Only the powerful artist will be able to understand this strange speech, that I speak the truth. One may sketch something with his pen on half a sheet of paper in one day, or may cut it into a tiny piece of wood with his little iron, and it turns out to be better and more artistic than another's big work at which its author labors with the utmost diligence for a whole year. And this gift is miraculous, for God often gives the ability to learn and insight to make something good to one man, the like whom nobody has found in his own days, and nobody has lived before him for a long time, and nobody comes after him very soon. And he also did wood cuttings, he did etchings, he was an incredible artist. So what else is going on up there in the north? And this is the Northern Renaissance. It's different from the Italian Renaissance. This is just weird, isn't it?
Yes.
Can we just say this? So what's going on? This is a triptych. It's an altarpiece that closes in. It's 3 pieces. Can you see the side panels would fold in? And there's a painting on the outside as well as on the inside. Okay. So this panel's pretty easy. What's going on? Adam and Eve. And God says what? To Adam and Eve. Tend the garden and
Don't eat the tree.
be
Be fruitful. Yeah.
fruitful and
Multiply.
how's that happen? I'm just asking. Okay. And Vosh is a equivalent to Edgar Allan Poe. I'm just making that assumption.
Oh, okay.
Because he's got this incredibly weird imagination, right? I mean, you know, there's some animals in here that you probably will never see.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if you do, you're on something. It's probably not a good thing. You know, and look at our Fountain of Life.
Yeah.
You know, and yet this is kind of interesting because that cat's got a mouse.
Oh, you're right.
Oh.
This is pre-fall day. Should that be?
No.
No.
Probably
I
not.
mean, nature hasn't fallen yet.
Interesting.
Interesting. Okay, so then we've got be fruitful and multiply. Weird, huh?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I want a strawberry.
Wow.
that size.
Understatement.
You want a what?
Strawberry that size.
Oh my word.
Or
I mean,
raspberry that size.
This
And
was
just
a
eating.
surrealistic way to portray.
It does. It
It's
really
extremely
is.
surreal. Yeah. I mean,
It's-
you
it
know,
looks like a
nobody
modern
really
piece.
knows what's going on here. I mean, there have been lots of things written about this, but we don't know. He didn't tell us what he's doing.
They're all
I mean-
eating strawberries.
They're multiplying.
And the birds?
But what's weird is there's no kids here.
Oh.
Oh yeah, they're all older.
They're not older. They're all the same age as Adam and Eve.
And there's only a few African people.
Yeah, and I don't know where that came from.
That is
You know,
really weird. Like that.
Yeah, because
And are they having fun?
Yeah.
someone
No.
is stuck in an oyster shell.
They're having more fun than they're supposed to. Let's just say
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a little
It
perverted,
sure
isn't
looks.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels off.
They haven't done what they're supposed to do. It doesn't look like. Okay? So if you don't do what you're supposed to do, what?
You get that.
This doesn't
Yeah.
look good, does it?
Yeah.
No.
Because now the instruments that were instruments of pleasure are now instruments of torture.
Oh.
And just in case you wanted to know what this weird guy looks like, that's his face right there.
Oh my.
Oh,
And people are being sliced up. I should have brought my close-up so I could show
There's
you.
a
But
knife there.
this is my favorite part of this. This bird creature is eating a person.
Oh, I've seen this part of the picture.
And
Yeah, I remember.
like 4 and 20 blackbirds come out of his butt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just weird. And then he's kind of, and then there's this big bubble, and there's a person in there who's dropping into this hole that's just full of, yeah, and
Terrible.
monsters are, groping at different body parts.
A
It's
person
just- it's
suspended
just
on the
really weird.
harp. It's
So what you
very
doing?
weird.
This is a northern painter, German painter, and who knows what's going on, but there you go.
It's definitely the most like fantasy sci-fi like painting I've seen yet.
I'm surprised it
So
was
weird.
accepted.
Oh,
It's so,
yeah.
so different.
It is very
It
different.
is.
And it was, a lot of his, and he does do some really beautiful religious stuff, but he also does some really weird stuff. Now think about this. This is painted in 1505. They had gone through the plague,
Oh.
the 100 Years' War in Europe. I mean, again, they were coming out of a period of a lot of death. And he was a painter who painted death a lot.
Mhm.
Death wasn't seen in the art until after the plague.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is his paintings of death more realistic than this?
Yes.
Okay.
But
So
yet, death is like a skeleton with a robe on.
Oh.
Okay.
Interesting.
It's
Yeah.
obviously death.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because this life part's very surrealistic. This painting where he portrays life, it would be interesting. His portrayals of death were more realistic.
Yeah.
And death will come into there's one, death comes into an old man's room.
Mm-hmm.
He's lurking behind the curtain, and the man's in his deathbed.
Oh wow.
They're interesting, and I think this is quite interesting. But here's the cover when you close it.
That's kind of cool.
It's the flood,
Oh, it's the blood.
because that's what you got to do. You got to wipe it out, start all over again. But
Wow.
I want to point out something to you. Is the world round?
No, it's flat.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but
Oh, but it's in like this globe.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, we talk about they believe the world was round. Well, yes and no. I mean, they believed it was round, but
Yeah.
how could you fall off? Well, you can see how you fall off.
right.
It's kind of an interesting thing. So you actually see a lot of globes. There's early pictures from early in Christianity where God is sitting on a globe around the world.
What's the thing in the top left corner? Is that a person or just? It almost looks like an angel.
Yeah, it almost looks like it's a religious figure of some kind, and
God.
we're not even sure about that either.
Okay.
I mean, there's some
Weird.
I just keep thinking like maybe it's a coffee stain. I just keep thinking that. Every time it's like you can't really see what it is exactly.
a lot of coffees. Whoa,
Yeah. A lot of coffee stains and really just.
connecting. Did we get lost here somehow?
It's still looking good over here.
Okay, good.
Is this one again?
Okay, so let's go back to Italy for a little bit. I did these in chronological order. Let's go back and see what's going on in Italy. Italy's still the Renaissance. So are we surprised that we should see such linear perspective?
Oh, it is odd now because they were trying to use perspective from other things, but this is line based. This goes back to the older perspective, and this was Leonardo's or Leonardo da Vinci.
Mm-hmm. You're so good. And we would have known by Leonardo, right? Your book, your Veith book says, like the Greeks, the artists and thinkers of the Renaissance stressed ideal forms, spatial organization, realistic or rationalistic analysis, and a human-centered perspective. I brought some of these artworks I chose because they were mentioned in your book, and I wanted to make sure you saw them. Raphael, heard that name before?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I know, and my students, I just get so sad. I think with Donatello and Raphael, Ninja Turtles, but that's okay. You know, this is in the Vatican Library, and they're one's the Disputa, which is theological heroes, and then the other side is the School of Athens, which are philosophical heroes. Now, Raphael was a very gregarious man and well liked by everyone, but he died very young. I think he was like 39. So we don't have as much of him as we should.
So wait, who's the two in the center there? One's
Who are they?
Aristotle?
it's Aristotle, right? On one
And
side.
Plato and Aristotle.
What are they
Okay.
doing?
Yeah.
And okay, Aristotle's.
Plato.
Oh, it's
Look
Plato.
down.
Plato's okay.
Plato's got
That's
the other
confusing.
world, dual world
Okay.
view.
And Plato's.
Let's
here.
get back down to earth.
Yeah.
You know, so there's those two. And I will point out something else because he's mentioned in your reading. Diogenes,
Oh.
Mm.
you know, that cynic, you know, goes around looking for an honest man, living in his barrel, going to the bathroom on the street because, you know, what difference does it make? Yeah, and so you've got the people line up, and I can't sit here and point out all the people, but they would make perfectly good sense. I would follow one or the other, Aristotle or Plato. Now, this is Raphael looking right there. So he's put himself in the painting. And there's another interesting person. This person was not in the painting in its original form.
Oh my.
This was the last edition, and it was after the painting was finished. And this is in the Vatican Library. And if you go today to see the Sistine Chapel, you have to go through a very convoluted route because there's so many people, but you go through the Vatican Library. It's not that far away to get from the Vatican Library to the Sistine Chapel, and you're still under roof. And Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel in 4 years. He was a cantankerous old genius, and he got rid of his health very quickly, and he had to climb up on a scaffold, put the plaster on, and then paint. I mean, I can't imagine how physically laborious this was. And he actually wrote home and said, I'm dying here because my head touches my buttocks, and I can't paint stripping in my face all day long, and it's just terrible. You know, he didn't want to do it, like the Pope maybe. But one night, Raphael, young whippersnapper that he was, snuck into the Sistine Chapel and saw the ceiling. And he came back and he painted Michelangelo in his painting.
Oh my goodness.
And we know Michelangelo, and as a young man, got in a fight, and a guy punched him and broke his nose. So his nose is kind of flat. So when you see images of him, you can tell that he had this broken nose. So he put Michelangelo in it. Michelangelo did not like Raphael. Michelangelo didn't like very many people, actually.
That explains the pose.
Yeah, well, and Michelangelo said, I taught him everything he knows. So if he's a good artist, it's because I taught him.
Oh,
And he didn't do anything but just came into the chapel. Now, this is a perfect example of Renaissance emphasis on the ancient Greek world. Because what do we have? Balance, symmetry, harmony, Greek structures, well, Roman arches, Greek columns, Greek statues.
That's why Diogenes is out. He's outside the harmony. He breaks it because he's a cynic and he was weird back then.
He doesn't believe anything.
Yeah.
And your lines take, where does your eye go? Yeah. All that very important linear perspective. And then it also points to Aristotle and Plato, the two greatest Greek.
Who are having the debate, right?
Having the debate.
Where does that symmetry, those forms come from? Are they universal? Are they idealistic? Or are they particular? Or are they material? And that's the debate that's going to
It
play
continues.
out. Yeah.
And has been in debate since the very beginning. And here's my man. I'm just going to tell you. My students, for a retirement gift, got me a statue of him at this time because he's my man. He is about 16 feet tall.
Wow.
And that's without the podium. This is the first male nude in marble since antiquity. Now, there was a first male nude in bronze. That was the David by Donatello, and that was for a private garden, the Medici garden. This was for the center focus, the government square in Florence. This piece of marble was purchased by the city. A man was given the commission, and he started working on it, and he said, "This is a flawed piece of marble. I will not do this."
Wow.
That piece of marble sat there for years and years. And finally, the town of Florence said, "We've got to do something, please." They had a competition, as they always do in Florence. Somebody come and do this, David. Michelangelo was a very young man. He was in his 20s. And his dad wrote him and said, "Come home and do this." And he did. He came home and got the commission. And I love that story because it's a flawed piece of marble.
Yeah.
And it's probably the statue that most people know.
Yeah.
In the whole world.
How is it a flawed
It's
piece of
so
marble?
well done.
It had some veins in it. You know, the marble can be discolored in ways. You know how marble has
Oh, okay.
color. And what's really interesting is it's no longer in the place where it's supposed to be in the Palazzo. It's in the Academia Museum, but they put a copy in that square, and it has a real big color flaw. That was better. But anyway, this is man in perfection, right? He's perfect. He's idealized. And it's an interesting thing, too, because the strap is over his shoulder. And I don't know if you know about those slingshots, but those guys could hit a target at hundreds of yards. I mean, they were good.
They were lethal.
But what's he doing? Is this before or after?
After. Or
Can't tell what he's holding there.
that's the sling, right?
Or she's talking about his other hand, right? His sling's over his shoulder.
That's what the thing is telling me.
Yeah. This is
Before?
before.
I don't know. We don't know. But he's contemplating. And you were talking about eyeballs. If Michelangelo's statue, if he wants an intense eye, he does this to the people. Carves it out like that.
Oh, that's
Okay.
cool.
And he'll do that with his Moses. He does that with his David. I need to give you a close-up, but yeah. It's
That's a
very
really good
intense.
idea.
No,
It almost gives an impression of like light hitting the pupil or something like that.
it's the depth, that shadow that
Yeah.
gives you some impression.
Okay.
And he is completely created all the way around. I mean, he's in the round. He's beautiful. Now, that's
Broke. Why are
Baroque.
we talking about broken art?
I know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, huh? So the
Wow.
Renaissance.
We
The
forgot about
Renaissance said man is great. Man can do anything. Now, not everyone believed that. Do you know Machiavelli lived during the Renaissance, right?
Yeah.
Machiavelli, the
Yeah.
prince, who
Yeah, I've
said
read that.
man is wicked and fickle and all that kind of stuff. And he needs a strong ruler and kill him if you have to. And you can kill his relatives, just don't steal his property. I mean that
Oh, wow.
person. So it wasn't all perfect. But what happens is you have the Reformation, right? So in the 16th century, the church splits. Yes? We're all Presbyterian, you know this. So the church splits. This is a problem, isn't it? Now, initially, when Martin Luther was doing his thing, the Pope was really focused on war with France. The Pope had his hands tied. We had the Muslims at the door, the French trying to invade. He didn't have time to worry about a little guy called Martin Luther up in Germany. And that was the Lord's plan, because while he wasn't paying attention to Martin Luther was gaining followers, right? And things were growing up in Germany. So you have this Reformation, the split of the church in the 1600s. Okay? The other thing that happens is, and I'm embarrassed every time I think about this. The Christians just didn't let it go, did they? They fought.
Huh.
So you have the 17th century is a period of terrible warfare. The 30 Years' War is almost like World War One. You know, it's a precursor to the war because everybody took sides. And poor Germany, it's torn asunder. You know, everybody's fighting everybody. The Catholics don't like the Lutherans. The Catholics don't like the Calvinists. Nobody likes the Anabaptists, right?
Poor Anabaptists.
Poor Anabaptists. You know, they're you know, and we got a pacifist wing of the Anabaptists, and they're getting slaughtered.
Yeah.
Of course, you've also got a militant one too.
Didn't they like take over a city and
Yes,
start
Munster.
proclaiming that the end of the world? I gotta read about that.
Yeah,
I
they were a little
forgot the
bit.
guy's name, but he like had this whole thing where he was going back to the Old Testament.
And then the
he was,
Calvinists-
like, following all these people who,
Yeah.
and he had like this. He was almost like the Muslim many wives thing.
Yeah, they had many wives.
Didn't he like? Then the Calvinists and Lutherans basically got together and laid siege to the place and kicked them out.
Yeah. So it's very it was a very ugly time. So do you think they might have realized that rationalism and idealism and that maybe those things don't work?
Yeah.
Maybe that's not reality.
Then of course it just reemerges in the 20th century and World War I and II happened.
Exactly. So what ends up happening is the Catholic Church doesn't just bow over and say, okay, take over. They come back to fight. So they, of course, excommunicate and brand Martin Luther, who's a wanted man. They also have this movement, the Jesuit movement. You know Ignatius? As a study St. Ignatius.
Oh yeah, the Jesuits. They wanted to. They swear that came about. They come about before or after the Protestant Reformation. I always forget.
It's after.
It's after, and they wanted to devote themselves to the Pope and to claiming. It's kind of a weird. It was. They became very anti-Calvinist, very anti-Reformed.
And very militantly Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, Ignatius was a soldier and got wounded severely, and in his recovery, he started reading all these church hero stories, and so he became very, very, very militant. And they actually divided up the world, and they said, well, we're going to have, we're going to send people all these places, and we're going to educate. So they were very, very successful. So you've got the Jesuits on the move, you've got the Inquisition, which is you're guilty until proven innocent, and you also have the Council of Trent. So in 1645 to 1663, and that's a long meeting, the church convenes this huge meeting to address. Do we need to stop at some point soon?
Well, I just need
Now.
I'll be back.
Now?
Yeah, as soon
Okay.
as you get to a reasonable stop.
Well, we'll pick up there with the Council of Trent. That's the reason.
Okay. Oh man, it's like I don't want to stop. It's like a whole long story, and it's so fascinating.
Yeah,
It is a
I'm
story,
very
isn't it?
interested in it, but I'm
Okay, yeah.
Well, at any point you need to stand up, just stand up. Walk around, do whatever you need to do.
Did you stop it yet?
I would not be offended at all. At all.